welcome to soothe and sleep stories. Here, I'll help you get into a calm, deep sleep with soothing stories. So, dim the lights, close your eyes, and let the words help you rest peacefully. There was a harbor at the edge of town that smelled of rope and salt and wood worn smooth by years. In the day, fishing boats came and went, gulls shouted over nets, and men and women in rubber boots rinsed decks with easy motions learned from their parents and their parents before them. Children chased one another along the boards and were scolded in gentle voices that hid smiles. A bell on the pier rang when fog came in, and its sound felt steady as a heartbeat. By evening, the harbor quieted. Nets were folded. Buckets were turned upside down to dry. The bell fell silent. Lamps along the quay burned the color of warm tea and threw glows on water that stretched like yellow paths and then broke softly. People in town said there was one boat that did not belong to any crew and did not carry a name on its hull. They said it was small and dark and waited at the far end of the pier where the boards were older and the water deeper. They said it never moved in daylight, not even when wind pushed other boats into little bumps against their fenders. It only rocked a little, as if breathing. At midnight, they said, when the harbor fell fully asleep and the tide turned in its sleep, the boat untied itself and waited. It did not drift away. It did not call out or show a lantern. It only waited, and if you stepped in, it carried you where you needed to go and brought you back before the first gull cried for morning. Not everyone believed this. Not everyone needed to. But there were a few who walked to the pier at night with careful feet and quiet faces. One of them was a woman named Anna. Anna lived in a small room above the post office, 2 flights up, with a window that looked toward the harbor and caught a sliver of the bell tower if she leaned just so. She sorted letters by day and learned the neat roads of other people's lives by the names on envelopes and the way those envelopes felt in her hands. Some names lived there like stones in a stream, weighty and steady. Some passed through like leaves. She liked the sound paper made when it slid into a slot, and the clack of the hinged door when a customer checked their box. She liked the small rituals, the rubber stamps thud, the tidy bundles at day's end, the rattle of the cart down to the back door. But at night, even after long days, she lay awake, eyes open, mind moving like a tide that would not turn. She did not think of anything terrible. She thought of everything, small and large, old and new. And the thinking kept building itself like a sandcastle that toppled and began again. On a night when the moon was only a thumbprint and the wind came in low silver lines across the water, she put on her coat and her soft shoes and went out. The stairs creaked politely. The street was mostly asleep. A cat crossed, tail high. She walked toward the harbor without deciding to. Her feet knew the way. The lamps along the quay made their narrow rivers on the water. Somewhere, a late cup clinked on a saucer. She breathed the smell of salt and felt a part of herself answer from somewhere deep, the part that is older than the thinking mind and knows how to match breathing to waves. At the far end of the pier she saw it, a small boat, dark as if carved from night itself, tied with a single line to an iron cleat. It was not grand, not new. Its boards were rubbed smooth where hands would grip. A coil of rope lay in it, neat and ready. No name graced its side, only a patch where paint had once been and now was not. Anna stopped and looked at it the way one looks at a door that might lead to a room where one's name has been softly spoken. She placed her palm on the weathered rail. The wood felt warmer than the air. The boat lifted once, slow, like a nod. She did not call out. Calling would have been too loud. She stepped in. The boat accepted her weight and settled. She sat on the middle board and folded her hands in her lap. She did not untie the line. A moment later, she felt a small give under her, and the boat moved away from the pier, though the line remained. She looked and saw that the knot had loosened itself and slid like a clever fish, quiet and sure. The boat drifted backward, turned, and then began to move out of the harbor along a path that did not show on the water, but seemed to exist under it. The way a track exists under snow because so many feet have walked it. No oars dipped, no sail lifted. The boat just went, and in going, made a soft sound like a hand over silk. Anna wrapped her coat more closely and watched the lights of the town draw together behind her like the last stitch in a seam. Ahead lay the open water, not the dangerous kind, but the kind that holds and lifts. The stars showed between clouds in pieces that fit together if you were patient. She felt the wind stroke her cheek in the way a mother checks a child's temperature. Her thoughts, which usually ran like quick animals, slowed and lay down one by one, warm and breathing, not asking to be fed. The boat carried her toward a darker patch where the water felt heavier. Then, suddenly as looking up to find a friend in a crowd, she saw a narrow shape take form, an island, long and low, with a rim of stones shining wet. A line of dark shapes stood along the shore, trees, perhaps, but these trees seemed to wear night like a cloak, and their outlines were clean against the sky. The boat nosed into a small cove, and now she could see a beach of pale pebbles that clicked against one another as the water lifted and left them. The boat touched gently. It made the sound boats make when they find the place they have been looking for. Anna stood and stepped out. The pebbles shifted, but did not slip. She turned back. The boat waited, just a little rocking, just enough to say, "I am here." She walked up the narrow beach to where the trees began. They were not any trees she knew by day. Their trunks were smooth, the color of smoke. Their leaves were the color of shadows on snow. She reached out and broke off a brittle twig, and it did not feel like plant. It felt like the memory of a plant, dry and light, as if it remembered being green and had decided to rest from it. A path ran between them, not straight, not very long, but winding enough to ease a person into a different kind of time. Anna followed it. In the middle of the island, she came to a clearing where the ground was packed sand and the air was still. In the center stood a post as tall as she was, with a small bell at its top. The bell had no clapper. Under it hung a ribbon, frayed and soft. She touched the ribbon, and it moved a little as if with a tiny current that had nothing to do with wind. She sat on the ground and pressed her palms to the sand. It was cool and dry, even though the air smelled of salt. No insects buzzed. No birds called. Night made a gentle roof out of stars and cloud. She felt as if she were in the pause between a question and its answer, and that both were already kind. Her shoulders lowered, her jaw unclenched. She did not ask what this was. She did not ask why the boat had brought her here. She allowed being there to be enough. When she rose at last, she found the path had shifted slightly, the way a river shifts its edge without anyone noticing until a stone sits wet where it used to sit dry. She followed it back. The boat waited where she had left it, and she had a sharp, sudden thought that the boat would always wait, that waiting was its work and it loved it. She smiled and stepped in. It pushed away by itself and turned its bow toward the harbor. The town's lights widened again. The stars slid like quiet fish. The bell on the pier rang once, just once, though fog had not come. The boat returned to its cleat, and this time the line tied itself with that neat motion that is not a show but a kindness. Anna climbed out. She touched the boat's rail, and in that touch said thank you, and in the small lift of the boat heard your welcome. She went home by the street that ran past the bakery. She slept as if a soft weight had been laid over her. She returned the next night and the next. Each time the boat waited with the same patient body. Each time it carried her to an island and back. The island was not always the same. Sometimes it wore a small house with windows open, though no wind moved the curtains. Sometimes a stone bench sat beside a silent pool, whose surface reflected not the sky but a memory. Her mother braiding her hair with clumsy fingers, and both of them laughing because the braid went crooked and stayed that way. Her father whistling as he fixed a hinge, making up a tune that had no end. A friend at a train window lifting a hand. Later, sometimes the island held only a line of lanterns hung at knee height along the path. And as she walked past, each one lifted its light a little, as if nodding. One night, the boat took a different angle out of the harbor. It slid along the town's edge and past the last warehouse where ropes coiled like sleeping snakes on hooks. It turned toward a darker square of water where no boats usually went, because rocks lay there like resting animals that did not bother anyone unless you stepped on their backs. The boat passed without bump or scrape. The surface opened to a circle of black, as if the sea itself had blinked. In the circle floated another boat, even smaller than hers, with no one in it, and in the other boat lay a single oar across the middle seat like a sleeping arm. Anna's boat circled once, slow and respectful, and then moved on. She wondered whether another person elsewhere sat in their room and felt their thoughts soften without knowing a boat had turned aside to let that happen. Word moved quietly in town, as such words do, about the boat at the end of the pier. No one boasted of using it, bragging would have made it hide. But people who had once walked at night, looking down now, walked looking up. And when they crossed paths on the pier, they nodded with a small, shared understanding. The harbor holds more than water. A man who had carried grief like a hard fruit his pocket could not soften came back one morning with his shoulders lower and his mouth at rest. A woman who had been angry at everything sharp for a season stood on the pier at dawn and touched the cleat where the little boat tied, and then stooped to tie a loose shoelace on a child who was too busy staring at crabs to remember his feet. Not all changes were clear. Some were noticeable only to the person changed. Those might have been the most important. One evening Anna saw, for the first time, someone else at the far end of the pier, standing near the little boat as midnight gathered like a shawl. He was tall and thin in a long coat, his hands in his pockets. He turned when she approached, and they had the kind of conversation people have when both are about to go into a quiet church. The kind that grows from politeness, but rests on relief. "Does it?" he began, then stopped. "Yes," she said, smiling. He laughed softly. "I have not asked a question, and you have given me the answer I needed." She gestured, "You first." He shook his head. "You came before me. And besides, I think it would take me an extra minute to remember that I am allowed to step into something kind." She stepped into the boat, and it made room for her. She sat and let it go. As she drifted away, she saw him draw a deep breath, and then the next, and in that easing she felt the boat had already done its work, the part of it that happens on the pier before any water is crossed. On another night, a fog lay low, a delicate milk poured thinly over everything. The lamps along the quay made halos. The bell rang in slow patience. The boat waited. Anna stepped in, and the fog closed around her like a careful cloak. She could not see the islands, yet the boat moved without doubt, and she felt no fear. The water under the hull spoke in its gentle tongue. Once a gull cried, and the sound came from everywhere. The boat stopped without touching anything and sat. The air tasted like old silver. In that sitting, Anna understood that not all journeys end in places, some end in pauses. She sat with the boat and the fog and the sound of the bell, and felt that sitting can be a destination if you let it. When the fog thinned, the boat finished its silent shape in the water and carried her back. She climbed to the pier, feeling clean and uncarved, as if someone had sanded away harsh corners with very fine paper. She went home and set her letters for the next day in tidy piles and slept. The boat did not only carry joy. Some nights, the islands it found held thin places where sorrow stood like a person at a window. Once, Anna walked a path that led to a door standing by itself. No walls, only a door frame, and beyond it, the air rippled as if too full. She put her hand on the latch and held it there until her hand warmed it, and then she took her hand away and did not open the door. That night she went home and took from a box a scarf she had not worn since the winter her grandmother died. The scarf smelled like cedar and wool, and the old house, where she had learned how to stand on a chair and stir batter. She held it to her face and cried without hurrying and slept with the scarf folded under her pillow, and in the morning put it back and felt less like a door herself. The boat aged as all things do. A new scratch found the rail. One of the little ribs inside the hull bore a notch where a heel had pressed too hard. Anna liked to rest her foot there when she sat. Once she ran a hand along the outside and felt a place where someone had mended it with fine care. A new curve shaped to meet the old. Whoever had done it loved the old line and matched it. She pressed her fingertips there and thought, we can be both repaired and ourselves. Sometimes the boat brought her back quickly, as if the night had a small errand for her. Leave the worry here. Pick up this breath. Go. Sometimes it wandered. Once it slid along a bank low with reeds and delivered her to a place where the reeds parted like two long hands and a narrow creek glided in. It took her to a pool where no sound reached but the slow drip of water from a muskrat's whiskers. She watched the muskrat swim, nose up, eyes like beads, and felt that small life thread through the world exactly right. She came home with a new respect for small bodies doing what they are meant to do. Another time, the boat nudged into a cove under a cliff where the rock showed layers like pages in a book. And in the middle of the cliff was a hole, smooth and round. She felt that if she spoke into it with her quietest voice, the cliff would hold her words and keep them the way a mother keeps a child's drawing. She did not speak. She put her hand over her mouth gently and let the words be kept before they were made. News came to town, as it always does, good and hard in equal measure. A new bakery opened with a crust the color of hope. The price of coal rose, and everyone grumbled, and then helped one another carry a little more wood. A storm pulled shingles and tumbled crates and left fish flopping in puddles near the warehouse, and people ran with buckets and returned the fish to water, and then replaced shingles and sorted crates and made jokes over soup when it was done. Through it, at midnight, the small boat did what it had always done, waited. Its waiting became a kind of bell that needed no clapper. Anna's life moved like water, sometimes quick, sometimes slow. A friend moved away and wrote her letters that smelled faintly of the new city's dust. She wrote back and pressed a small pressed flower between the pages. An elderly man who always bought stamps 2 at a time stopped coming. And then one morning, a woman with eyes like his came for his mail with a key on a ribbon and said, quietly, that she would close the box soon. Anna set a hand on the counter as if to steady the wood, and the woman put hers on top of that hand for a second, and they nodded in a circle of understanding. That night, the boat took Anna to an island that held only a bench and a view and a wind that wiped the bench clean and then warmed it. She sat and thought of the man at the counter and how his careful folding of envelopes had always made her want to breathe more slowly. She breathed. The stars breathed with her. The bench held. She returned home easier. As seasons turned, the midnight boat taught her a small craft, how to carry less into sleep. Each night, standing on the pier, she looked at the harbor and let the water take a piece of the day from her hands. Some nights, it took a worry about money and sank it with a soft plunk. Some nights, it took a remark someone had made that had snagged on her, and it smoothed the snag. Some nights, it took nothing and turned to her with empty hands as if to say, "It's all right to arrive with nothing to drop." She did not always go. There were nights when rain rattled the roof hard and her bed felt like the right boat. There were nights when her friend came over with a jar of jam and a tale from the city, and they talked until the bell in the tower chimed once, twice, and they both laughed at being awake. There were nights when she stood at her window and watched the slice of harbor she could see and knew the boat waited and was not lonely. The waiting itself was a presence, like a lamp left on low in a child's room. One winter evening, when the cold had set the water into a dark metal and the wind drew lines on it that vanished and reappeared, Anna walked to the pier with a thermos under her arm. Her breath made ghosts. The little boat stood at its place. She poured a little tea into the lid and set it in the boat. The steam rose and then was gone. She climbed in and sat and let the boat go. It moved so gently, so respectfully against the cold, that she felt she ought to whisper thank you the way one whispers in a sick room. The boat took her to an island of nothing but air. No shore, no trees, only a sense of being surrounded by arms that could not be seen. She rested in that invisible embrace until her cheeks no longer ached with the sting of wind. When she came back, the teacup lay on its side, and a line of frost had drawn around it as if to say, "Here is where warmth was." She smiled and blew into her hands. Years passed. The boat aged further, and someone, perhaps the harbor master, perhaps a person the boat had carried and who wished to return the carrying, sanded its boards one spring and rubbed them with oil that smelled like citrus. The sheen it took on looked like health, not like vanity. The rope was replaced with another of the same hemp, the same twist. A small brass nail at the bow that had loosened was tapped in with a love that could be heard if you listened very hard. The boat, in its quiet, stayed itself. Anna grew older too. Her steps on the pier matched the pier's slow rhythm. Her hair went the color of sea foam where it thins and catches light. Her hands moved as if they remembered long before she asked them to. She sometimes sat in the boat without going anywhere, letting the night make of her a shore. She sometimes told the boat a story, not aloud, but in the way one tells a story to a room by sitting in it with the story and letting the room absorb it. The boat absorbed and gave back calm. When at last the time came that her nights were mostly in a chair by the window and her breaths were longer between, the harbor still came to her. She woke from a doze and knew, without seeing or hearing, that the small boat waited at the end of the pier, tied with a rope that never knotted too tight to loosen, rocking a little, saying with its body the only thing it had ever said, "I am here when you are ready." She smiled and slept again. The harbor held as harbors do. The gulls cried, nets dried, children ran and were told to slow down and did not. The bell rang in fog and was quiet in clear weather. And at midnight, when the tide turned in its sleep and the lamps threw narrow rivers on the dark, the small boat waited. It did not ask for names. It did not pick or choose. If your feet found the boards and your hand found the rail, it was yours for the hour that was not an hour, but a curve. It carried you to islands made of memory and pause and air, and returned you to yourself, which is the best shore there is. And if you stood on the pier and did not step in, it carried you a little anyway, because some boats work by moving and some by waiting, and this one was strong at both. If you walk down there some night, when your own mind is a tide and will not turn, you may see it. Small, dark, simple, sure. You may place your palm on its rail and feel warmth where there should be only wood. You may step in or not. Either way, the harbor will lift and lower. The stars will gather and scatter. The bell will remember when to ring. And somewhere on a pale beach, under trees that wear shadows like fine clothes, by a post with a ribbon, or on a bench with wind for a blanket, there will be a spot that fits you exactly, waiting without hurry, the way the boat waits for midnight and will always wait, as long as there is water to rock it and a night to say, softly, now. There was a meadow west of the river, past the last hedgerow, and a shallow ditch that ran dry most summers. By day, it looked like any other stretch of grass. Cows sometimes wandered to its edge and then turned away, bored by the taste. Bees worked the clover. The wind crossed it without stopping, laying the grass one way, then the other, like a hand smoothing a blanket. A narrow track ran along one side where people had walked for years to reach a stand of birches on the far slope. Nothing there asked for notice. Nothing asked for a name. At night, when the light fell and the sky pulled its darker cloth over the land, the meadow changed. Tiny flowers opened the size of a thumbnail, shaped like little cups with thin lips. They were not silver like coins are silver. They were silver like moonlight on a spoon. The cups caught the air and made a faint sound when moved, softer than a moth's wing, clearer than a sigh. If the breeze lifted and went on, the sound grew into a thin ringing that ran along the grass the way light runs across water. People who heard it called the place the Meadow of Silver Bells. Not everyone knew where it was. Some said it only revealed itself when a person had been holding their breath for too many days and had just started to let it out. Some said you could find it if you listened for metal in the wind. Others laughed and said you could find it by walking west until the fields forgot to be fields. All these were true in ways that made sense to the heart. A woman named Ciela found it on a cool evening in late spring. She had been a potter most of her life, filling a small shop with bowls and mugs that fit the hand and did not shout. Her work had a quiet strength. She liked the wheel's steady spin and the way clay became itself again when she let it. But her father had died that winter, and grief had settled in her like a slow, heavy river. She ate. She slept. She made pots because her hands remembered how. She could not find the small, easy joy that used to sit on the shelf beside her tools. The days were all right. The nights stretched long and thin. She lay awake and felt that if she could cry the right way once, everything would ease. The right way did not come. She left her shop at dusk, without telling herself where she was going. She crossed the bridge, passed the hedgerow, stepped over the ditch that held a thin ribbon of water, and found the field beyond it breathing as if asleep. On the far side, grass gave way to something else. At first, she thought it was mist lying low, but when she stepped closer, she saw small flowers opening all across the meadow, pale as milk in a spoon, hundreds, then thousands, then so many she could not guess. Each lifted its cup to the night and waited. A breeze moved over the meadow. The cups answered. The sound that rose was almost nothing, then more, then a fine, clear thread that wove itself from one edge of the field to the other and back again. It was not a tune. It was not a bell struck hard. It was the sound of air touching grace. Ciela stood at the edge for a long moment, because it felt wrong to rush into something that spoke so softly. She let the ringing settle in her ears. She let her breath fall into time with it. Then she stepped onto the path that crossed the meadow in a lazy curve. The grass brushed her calves. The flowers shifted around her ankles, bright and gentle, and their sound changed as if to make room for her steps. She walked slowly. The path widened where her feet fell, then narrowed again after she passed. She was not afraid to brush the bells. They moved back like kind hands and rang with the sort of welcome that does not insist. Near the middle of the meadow stood a low stone, flat as a seat. She sat on it. The stone held the last of the day's warmth. She placed her palms on either side of her hips and felt steadiness. Around her, the bells answered the lightest folds of wind. The sound filled the space behind her eyes. It was the sound of patience. It asked nothing. It scolded nothing. It made a space for sorrow to breathe without turning into something else. She closed her eyes and remembered her father not as he had been at the end, small and quiet in a bed, but as he had been at the wheel when she was a child, hands big and gentle, steady on the clay, his laugh low and brief, the way he would hum when the curve of a bowl began to show itself. The hum had sounded a little like these bells. She felt tears arrive without sharpness. They slipped without struggle. The bells accepted them the way warm earth accepts rain. Someone coughed lightly. Ciela opened her eyes. At the far edge of the meadow, a shepherd stood, his crook tucked under his arm, a dog waiting at his heel. He lifted 2 fingers from the crook in greeting and stepped onto the path. The bells shifted for him the way they had shifted for her. He walked to the stone and stood a respectful distance away. "First time?" he asked in a voice that fit the field. "Yes," Ciela said. "Do you come often?" "Most nights," he said. "The ewes wander less when the meadow is singing. I think it smooths the itch in them. It smooths the itch in me." Ciela smiled a little. "I did not know a field could sing." "The field always sang," he said. "We only notice when our ears remember how to listen." He nodded toward the path that wound on past the stone. "If you go to the western edge, near the 3 birches that lean, you'll find a place where the bells are lower. They ring in your belly there. Some evenings that's the right place. Other evenings, the place by the ditch is right, where they sound higher and lighter. The meadow talks to different parts of a person on different nights." He tipped his head once the way kind people do, when they do not wish to hold you with talk you did not ask for, and he moved on. Ciela listened to his steps move through the field and felt the bells change their tone to fit him. When he reached the far side, the dog lay down with a sigh, and the shepherd stood with one foot on the lowest rail of a fence and watched the sky try on deeper blues. Ciela sat until the stars came. A moth lifted itself out of the field, circled her once, and dropped back, as if it had needed only to count who was there. A fox passed along the fence line, low and quiet, its tail a brush painting darkness onto darkness. The bells sang for all of them, together and separately. When she rose, she walked to the western edge where the birches leaned. The shepherd had spoken true. The bells were deeper there, their sound like a hand on the back. She pressed her palm against a birch and felt the tree's slow, careful life. She breathed with it. She did not need to tell the tree anything. The tree knew. The bells told her so. On the way home, she paused beside the ditch and looked back. The field still glowed a little faint and even like coals under ash. The bells had grown soft again, as if the meadow was settling its own mind. She crossed the bridge and walked the road and slept. Her sleep had the shape of a simple bowl. She came back the next night and the next. The meadow did not always show its bellflowers at once. Some evenings she arrived too early and sat in the tall grass and watched as dusk spoke to each cup, and each cup answered by opening. Some evenings she arrived late, and the ringing held such a steady thread that she felt she had stepped into a cloth already woven. She learned the different voices of the field. The quick silver line that ran just under her knee when the breeze was playful. The slow, bellied tone that lived near the ground when the air barely moved. The softest sound of all, which was not a ring, but the sense that ringing could happen if a thumb's width of wind would lift. She met others. The shepherd often, a baker who came after closing, flowers still ghosting his sleeves, a woman who always walked the path to the stone and stood behind it and set both hands on its top and closed her eyes. After a while, she would whisper a name and then smile and leave. 2 boys crept out once and lay on their backs with their heads almost touching and counted shooting stars aloud. 3, one said. 5, said the other. 7, said both, as a streak cut in a long line across the bowl of the sky. The bells adjusted to their counting, not getting louder, just growing more present, as if keeping time for them the way a good friend keeps time when you try to learn a song. On a night when the moon rose late and the field felt like a low tide, Ciela brought a small clay bowl in her bag. She had made it that morning without thinking ahead, not big enough for soup, not quite the right shape for tea. She carried it like a question. At the stone, she set the bowl down, and the sound of porcelain against stone was a small, clear note that entered the stream and found its place. She did not ask the field for anything. She only placed the bowl and laid her hand on its rim and held it there until the clay gave back the temperature of the night. When she took her hand away, she felt her father's hum again, not in her ears exactly, but behind them, in the place where thoughts grow quiet. The shepherd noticed the bowl when he reached the stone on his turn around. He touched his hat. "A good shape," he said. "It will hold a handful of bells, if they ever wish to be held," she said. And the shepherd laughed softly, not because he thought her foolish, but because the meadow had a way of letting even impossible ideas make sense. That evening, a young girl arrived, no more than 10, with a dog almost as big as she was. The dog sat when she sat, and lay down when she lay down, and lifted its head when the bells rose in a line like the edge of a smile. The girl patted the dog's neck and whispered a story to it about a day in school, and a picture she had drawn, and a boy who had pushed her and apologized. The dog listened, and the bells made a sound that felt like yes. Ciela learned that the meadow's sound lived also in other places. Back in her shop, when she lifted a bowl from the kiln and tapped it lightly with a finger to hear if the ring was true, the note that came was part silver bell, part baked earth, part daylight. When she opened her window at night and the curtain moved a little, the movement made a whisper that was savored by the silence the way butter is savored by warm bread. When she tied a bundle with twine for a customer, and the knot slid into its place and tightened without complaint, she heard a tiny click that felt like a bell far away agreeing. News, as always, moved through town. A new baby, a horse lame, and then fine, a house needing a new roof, a cousin writing with talk of a market where people traded apricot stones for buttons, and both sides left smiling. The meadow went on making its music, whether there was joy in it or trouble. The ringing did not turn cheerful on good days or sad on hard ones. It accepted what the night brought and turned it into something that could be breathed. On a still night at midsummer, when the air held warmth the way a loaf holds steam, Ciela brought her father's old apron folded under her arm. She had kept it on a peg since winter and had not been able to decide what to do with it. It smelled faintly of clay and smoke. She laid it over the stone and pressed her palms against it. She did not speak. The bells around her lifted and lowered in slow strokes, like the sea painting a shore. She felt a shift in her chest, not a breaking open, but a moving aside, the way one opens a cupboard to make room for something new without throwing anything away. She folded the apron again and carried it home. The next morning, she cut a small piece from one corner and stitched it into the hem of her coat. She returned the rest to the peg. She did not need to decide now. The bells had taught her that some decisions like to settle like silt in water and find the bottom themselves. Summer slid toward late. The bells grew a little slower, as if they had stretched and now leaned into their own sound. The shepherd sometimes left his crook at the fence and stood with his hands in his pockets, and at those times the dog leaned against his leg and watched the stars in the exact way the shepherd did, both heads tilted a little. The baker came one night with a woman whose laugh was low and bright, and they stood together and said nothing until the laugh came again and joined the ringing the way A new instrument joins a tune and fits without forcing. One evening, a wind came up from the river, carrying a change in weather. The bells reacted like a flock taking flight. The whole field rang at once, not loudly, but full, a moving lantern of sound. The shepherd raised his chin to it, as if to drink. Ciela felt the sound run through her month of days and settle them into rows like plates set on a shelf. She breathed out and knew her breath had been welcomed. In autumn, the flowers did not close at once. They faded in little circles, here and there, while others stayed bright, so that the meadow looked, for weeks, like a light seen through leaves. The sound thinned and clarified. It grew fine enough to touch the edges of a worry without making it larger. People still came. An old couple held hands while walking the path, looking into one another's faces now, and then, with small, surprised relief, as if reminding themselves that the person they loved was still there in the face they knew. A boy came alone and knelt and set down a small toy boat. The boat had a broken mast. He left it and went home. The next night it sat where he had placed it. 2 nights later someone had tied a thin, steady twig as a new mast with a string made of grass. The boy's mouth opened in a perfect circle, and he looked around at strangers who were no longer strangers and said, "Thank you to all of them and none." Winter arrived like a letter written in thick pen. Frost found the meadow. The bells closed. They did not ring for weeks. The field looked ordinary, and then, under snow, like any other white field. Ciela went anyway. The path still curved. The stones still held the shape of a seat under its small coat of ice. She sat and listened to the silence that was not empty. The shepherd came in a heavier coat and nodded and stood near the fence with his breath making small clouds around his face. The bells did not sing. The field kept their sound in its deep pockets the way a grandmother keeps candy. Every now and then, when a wind brushed the snow into cliffs and then into shelves, a tiny tinkle sounded from somewhere under the white, so small she could have imagined it. She decided not to decide whether she had imagined it. One late winter day, the sun found its strength again and laid it out across the meadow. The snow pulled back from the eastern edge first. The bells there showed themselves, stubborn, a little bruised by cold, but still bells. That evening, their sound returned like a thin blue line drawn across paper. It grew and did not grow, both at once. It was enough. Ciela stood and felt her hands unclench and thought, not in words, stay. She felt the meadow answer, we do. Spring came. The bells multiplied. Their cups opened earlier, closed later. Birds carried bits of their color in their beaks, as if to paint nests with them. Children rolled down the small hill beside the fence and stood at the bottom dizzy and happy, and then rolled again. The meadow held all of it without tipping. Ciela stitched more pieces of her father's apron into her coat's hem, in the facings, inside the pockets. She used the rest to line a basket that she kept near the door. When she reached into it and felt the cloth, the bell's sound came to her palm, even in noon brightness. Some nights, the meadow held surprising sounds alongside its own. A violin once, played low by someone who stayed outside the fence and matched the field note for note until the two were not separate. A flute another night, a thin bright line that wove around the ringing the way a swallow weaves around water. The players never stayed long. They did not tilt the field toward music. They tilted their music toward the field. One evening, Ciela found the path lined by small, smooth stones, each the size of a thumb, set there by someone with patient hands. Along the edges of the stones, bits of ribbon had been tied to blades of grass, blue, white, gray, the colors of sky and bell and night. The ribbons were tied loosely so they could let go when rain came or wind tugged too hard. The meadow wore the decorations without pride, the way a person wears a child's gift, pleased to be thought of. On a warm night when summer had already decided to be summer, Ciela arrived late and found the meadow full. The shepherd, the baker, and the laughing woman, the old couple, the boy with the mended boat, the girl with the big dog, and people she did not know. No one spoke. A breeze ran through them all, and every bell cup lifted its small voice and let it down again, like breathing. The sound was so even that it felt like standing in a large heart. Ciela sat on the stone and placed her palms where she always did. She felt that if she lifted her hands away, the stone would keep the shape of her palms for a moment in warmth alone. She felt that if she left the meadow and came back in a year, the field would still be ringing, patient as a tide. The thought did not make her sad. It made her quietly happy to belong to something that did not depend on her belonging to be itself. She pressed the small clay bowl against the stone. It made the clear note it always made. The bells picked up that note and carried it a little, then set it down and turned back to what they were doing. She thought of her father's hands again, not just the last winter or the wheel humming, but all of it together, one life, steady, then done. The bells made the shape of both steady and done, and held it in a way that did not break her. She cried, and the tears felt like part of the ring, not a separate sound. At last she stood. The field went on. She walked the path to the ditch and stepped over and paused on the bridge and looked back. The meadow glowed the way a hearth glows after the last log has fallen into itself and settled. She whispered thank you to the field and to the air and to her own hands for bringing her there. Then she crossed to the road and went home, leaving the bells to keep the night steady for others. If you go west of the river and cross the little bridge and find the ditch and step over it and feel the grass grow softer under your feet, you may hear it. At first it might seem like your own breathing talking back to you, then like insects, then like nothing at all. And then, if you stand still long enough, it will be the meadow of silver bells telling you that air can sing when it finds 1,000 small mouths and nothing to prove. You can walk the path or stand at the edge or sit on the stone. The bells will change for you and for the person who comes after, and for the fox, and for the moth, and for the shepherd, and for the dog. You can bring a bowl or a ribbon or nothing. You can bring a sorrow or a rest. The meadow will not measure you. It will turn wind into sound and sound into the sort of quiet that lets a heart put down what it has been holding and pick up only what it needs to carry home. And when winter comes, and the bells close, and the field looks like any other field, you can still stand there and remember how they lift and lower, how they fill and empty. You can carry that memory like a small silver cup in your pocket. And when the night is long, you can take it out and tilt it and listen to the faint ring it makes against your palm. And you can say, even with no meadow in sight, even with no wind at all, yes, I hear you. And the space inside your chest will answer, we hear you too. And there will be room, suddenly, for breathing.